this particular session, we're going to be discussing the foundation of all of relational history, relational future, relational current. In other words, past, present, and future. We're going to show the connection of our relationships and how they evolve into those situations that we are in today. We have what's called a relationship sequence. It's there in the manual, and of course it's also in the journal. And I want to set this up with the verse of 2 Corinthians 5:18, which is, "To wit, all things are of God, who hath reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ." That's the gospel. "And hath given unto us the ministry of reconciliation." So once we're reconciled with God, remember the two commandments? We receive His Spirit. Then we are to be the emblem of reconciliation to the people around us. So any ministry that you and I are involved in must include that, because it's biblical. We are always reconciling. In other words, wherever somebody's pounding wedges, we need to be taking out wedges and putting in bridges, because reconciliation is the bridge. And the ultimate bridge to reconcile man to God was Christ. And that's in the fall of man, Genesis 3:15. A perfect relationship by sin destroyed. A perfect relationship by sin of man destroyed. And we've been falling ever since. And only God could fix what man had broken. This business that man can somehow fix what man broke, it's kind of like a violation of a law of physics. It's not just an immutable spiritual law. In other words, that which is imperfect can't make itself perfect again. It's a violation of logic. That's a physical law. It's also a spiritual law. So man can't fix what he broke in the relationship with God. That's what religion tries to do. That's exactly why we have the divisions among religious institutions around the country and around the world. Religion is man's feeble attempt to try to fix what only God can fix. And we will always come up short. That is why what God had presented to man was a relationship. In the Bible that I read, I see everything about relationship. I see little to nothing about religion. I think I know one verse in James. Pure religion and undefiled before God and man is to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. In other words, okay, show it by who you are and what you do, and if you want to call yourself religious, fine, but the real issue is this. What's your relationship with me? What are you going to do with Jesus? It's about relationship. You know, I might just add this because we will talk until He comes about the so-called non-existent separation of church and state. You know what I'm able to believe on this? I'm all right that the religion and state are separated. I'm all right with that. Because religion take over state. If it's some of the religions that you and I see out there, wouldn't be a good idea. But God was never to be separated from the state. There is no separation of God and state, ever. Not in our founding fathers, not in any writing that was set forth. There was never a separation. So you make sure you have that answer and you come back. I'll take your separation of religion and state, but there is no separation of God from state. I mean, look at on our money. In God we trust. We have now the ministry of reconciliation. It's going to be the difference after being betrayed or hurt by someone important between bitterness and vengeance or restoration and healing. Now, the relationship sequence, you can look on that page in your manual. We're going to talk about past relationships and how those past relationships affect us today. Before we do that, I think what I'd like to do is just look at some of the characteristics, blue and red script, that are below the relationship sequence on the full diagram, but they're also in the manual. There's a wonderful way to assess your relational history by the blue and red. I need to interject this. The color has symbolic significance. The blue represents the water of healing. And I want us to look at the water application here is that it washes, it cleanses, it purifies. As a matter of fact, Bethesda, the name of our organization, which is why I chose it, means place of healing. It's actually, in the Hebrew, Beth is house. House of healing or house of mercy. But the healing here is not like a lot of folks connect us with Bethesda, Maryland or the Naval Hospital. And I said, no, they heal the body. This is the healing of the soul. So this isn't so much a place, it's a state, a state of being. And that's the application, now that you understand that. And I want you to see that in the blue script, the blue is the water of healing. The red is the fire of rage. The fire of rage. Now, I want to make a distinction between anger and rage. And I want you to look at love and affection will be the hallmark of a healthy relationship history. Bitterness and hate. Now, this has to do with what prevails, because there are going to be times when people have hurts and pains and conflicts. I think sometimes even in the church we get the idea there's a spat, an argument, or somebody gets upset. Oh no, we're really in trouble now with God. Well, the truth is God gives liberty on our feelings. The reason why he loved David so much, and David was a man after God's own heart, is because David was real. But if you look at the readings of David, from the Psalms to the Old Testament and other passages of the Old Testament, you will see that he's actually crying out to God and yelling at him. You anointed me king? What, to be murdered? How long are you going to let my enemies pursue after me? Can you imagine how he said that? What were you thinking? God loved that, because as he poured out, God poured in. That was real. This business about covering the realness of who we are is what puts us in the bondage of implosion. You know, the imploding sense of, you want to talk about neurotransmitter flooding and problems. That's what causes neurotransmitters, where the dopamine goes up, the cortisol deregulates the dopamine, and the other one is the noradrenaline, and we're out of balance, and pretty soon we start to feel dopey and depressed and tired, and we go to sleep and we don't rest. We wake up, we know we slept, but we're still tired because we're struggling against being real in the relational situation with him. He can handle it. We just don't believe he can. So love and affection, bitterness and hate, and then you have emotional bonding corresponding to detachment and alienation. Have any of you, and you don't need to answer this, grown up in a home where you felt like you were from another country? You didn't belong. You didn't have a connection. And I call it the big T's. These are to be the most important people in your life, but even if they didn't do bad things to you, and some of you, I'm sure, have experienced bad things, the fact is that their investment in you is so minimal that it takes away your value and your dignity. You can't not have a response to that from your soul. Then they can do the best they can and wound you because they themselves were toxic. I took a whole lot of toxicity into my marriage and my family. A whole lot. Totally blind to it. That didn't make me not accountable. But it was all from violations against me that I hadn't, it sounds like I'm blaming. No, violations against me that I hadn't healed or gone to the great physician to restore me. And he was there all the time, but he won't force himself. So we have to recognize that the relationship past will be evidence of relationship present, both in the degree of health that it resonates from it or the degree of harmfulness that resonates from it. So you can look at the contrasting script all the way down at the end. And I do want, before we get to the end, show you that on the blue side is minimal manageable conflict with quick resolution. There is conflict in the healthiest relationships. If there isn't, it is not normal not to have conflict. The difference is this: it is not compounded conflict that wounds each other that is not restored. A healthy home is not measured on how much conflict occurs in it. It's measured on how much conflict is not resolved. I grew up in a home where conflict was compounded by conflict. And the norm was, you just never resolve anything. And you think when time passes, it's going to be all right. Everybody just forgets. No, they don't. It's compounded against my soul so that my soul is building up. And I look at it, this is my little analogy, as little charges of gunpowder. You know, like little capsules. But over time, it becomes a keg. And then somebody says something at the wrong time, and it's a fuse that lights, and boom, you've got a catastrophic explosive response. That's why we can't let these things go. They don't take a whole lot of time to resolve. Pretty much done in instances. The thing is, though, if we think that time passing, and I've even had believers tell me from time past against soul violations, and some of you may be thinking this, well, when I became a believer, that was all under the blood. Put it all under the blood. I said, by the fruit of your life, sir, ma'am, it ain't under his blood, it's under your blood. Your sin may be forgiven, but your affliction is ever before you. That's what Paul meant when he said, worketh out your own salvation in fear and trembling. That's exactly what he meant, soul salvation. The soul affliction comes with me into the Christian life. I'm forgiven. I die to be absent from the body, present with the Lord. I surrender to Christ. But this constant problem where I'm stumbling is from the affliction against my soul. See, I have my eternal life, but I don't have my abundant life. That's what this is about. And that will hinder everything. And so it's not back there. That's the source. That's why I got hurt. But it's here. And if that means it's ever before me. So where I go, it goes. Until it's cleansed. Because it wounded my soul and it infected me. Think about this. That betrayal at the hands of those most trusted will always lead to emotional infection. Betrayal at the hands of those most trusted. Why? Because the who is equally significant to the what. A lot of people get caught up in what was done to me. The who is equally significant. If the who is a person that I hardly had a connection with, I didn't expect much from that person, it will hurt me and embarrass me. But if the who is one of the most important men in my life, and as a child, that's my father. And the most important woman in my life, as a child, that's my mother. And they take away my value. If that does not unravel me, I am not normal. Once again, and I'm going to have to disclaim this all through, I am not blaming. I am showing source of the power of that relationship. Don't you understand that my soul is crying out for more and something more wonderful from them? Don't you understand that that is the most wonderful thing that I could say to make them feel as if I care about them? It's a compliment. I just wanted more from you. That's who you are to me. To be truthful to say this. Now, we're not going to get excited here. You're going to see it disclaimed through the material. Nobody is ever going to have to go back and confront someone who's they're currently with today that has hurt them. My son and I have done that. And that's why he's on our national training team. He has lived it, both as victim and offender. I have lived it, both as victim and offender. And the victory and that restoration makes, we tell our story. When we go nationwide, we tell our story to the troubled youth and the distressed families. It gave a whole nother dimension. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. We shouldn't. I like what Dobson says, if we agree on everything at all times, one of us isn't necessary. And I guess I got an idea which one that would be. The old one. So it's not about that. It's about unity. It's about trust. It's about loyalty. And it's about restoring when offenses happen. So this is really good news. And you might say, well, that's great. I can change myself, but how about that other person? Well, you know what? Real simple. The best way to change another person is to begin by changing yourself. And if you have the victory and the restoration and that person doesn't, you will never see a more miserable person in your life than the ones around you that need to get that victory and see it in you. And you will never see a person deep in their heart that has more hope because they see you. So we got to get off the fixing of the other and get on to the fixing of self. Now, I want to also make sure we understand too that as we look at the relationship sequence diagram, that anger and wrath. We're going to make a distinction between them as we walk through that. I need to go through it. I'm going to go through it quickly because the script is in the manual. If you look at the relationship sequence, you look at 12 o'clock, you see on the blue circle, you see we start with offenses. Think about what Jesus said in Luke 17:1. It is impossible, but that offenses will come. In other words, the reality of life is that we will be offended and we will offend one another. The two qualities of a relationship, I need to back up on relationship, are mutuality and trust. Now, I covered that in the previous chapter. The mutual connection and the degree of trust shows an investment. So the relationship goes down a road of testing. That's why you see that script there on the blue arrow. I like to say that a relationship that can't be tested is a relationship that can't be trusted. That's how you know it has the resilience and the strength of the bonding. The offense is what violates the relationship. If you consider this, that sin against God is the offense against God. It's falling short of the mark. There are two types of offenses that we set forth here. And the reason why we do that is because our minds like to look for intent. But our souls don't always make a distinction. What I mean. Intentional offenses are easy to identify. Abuse, berating, emotional attack, violence against a person. It's easy. If we started to do the list, we could say that's intentional, that's intentional. But by default is different because it's not necessarily intentional by the one who hurts me, but my soul still feels violated. But see, my head will say, but I have no right. One of the biggest situations between Joseph and I was that because of my work and being involved in the church, he didn't have liberty to tell me the truth about how I hurt him, yet I was hurting him in many ways. But he didn't have intellectual liberty because, wait, Dad does these things, he does good work, how dare I? How dare I? The truth is, he can't get healed until he gets real, remember? And you say, well, gee, I don't know if I want to go that far in my relationships. Well, then this is as good as it gets. The truth is, though, there will always be something between two people in that scenario if they don't have the liberty to share it. And the greatest gift he ever gave me was telling me the truth about how I hurt him. You know how liberating that was for me? I don't want to be perceived as not doing wrong in the area of relationships, even though that's my whole career in ministry. Don't put me in that position because I can't measure that up. I can't do that. I want to be able to have that liberty to know that there's a restoration possible and that the violation is not eternal and the fact that it can always be resolved. But I also want to have that liberty to be able to say to one another, you know, we've hurt one another. That's the real measure of the health of a relationship, is being able to say that. When we talk about anger, well, let me get to the hurt, hate, harm sequence. The two roads to go after being offended are either that red road to destruction. Remember, the fire of rage. Remember that the red is symbolic of a burning. What do we say when a person loses their temper? Boy, did he get hot under the collar. You know how the neck swells up in the carotid arteries. Red, everything's red, everything. They see red, right? And the blue is to quench that fire. So that's the symbolism of the color. But I want you to know that the hurt is a natural response even though it's on the red road. If you're not hurt when you've been offended, even if it's not intentional, you're not normal. The truth is you are hurt and I am hurt, but we don't always admit it sufficiently to be able to let the great physician, the restorer of our souls, tender it. But the hurt, if it's a marked violation or repeated violation at the hands of somebody very important, will always degenerate, you might say, into hate and bitterness, which is really sourced out of this thing called bitterness. And we don't like to say that we have hate in us. But if you look at the scriptures, if you look at the New Testament, hate is always written to the believer. The man hates his brother. He is this. Man hates his brother. He walks in darkness. Hate is written to the believer because God said, we got a problem with it. And it's always going to be the result of relational betrayal. Now think of every murder. Hate. Think of every war. Hate. I mean, can anybody really make a case that all the ills of the world are not based upon relational betrayal and unresolved anger? You'll see unresolved anger here on the red script. So the next place is vengeance. This is where I act out in response to. You talk about reciprocity. I'm going to now respond to the one that hurt me. The problem is this. You have heard, I don't get angry, I get even, or I don't know how that saying goes. But the point is, it never is even. The response back is always compounding beyond the response given. Look, it's a spiritual thing. I don't fully understand it, but I will tell you it's proven through the ages. The original rejection of Ishmael and Hagar has gone through thousands of years of evolution, and because healing was not sought by any generation, that's why Islam fed into that. It's because it's a religion that's allowed to and actually given liberty to by Allah to hate. It was easier to hate, but it's really the rejection of the father, Abraham. They all have the same father. The thing is, when you compound that through the generations, you don't just have, words exchanged to one another, or slaps, or even punches. You have a militant terrorist consumed with multi-generations of hatred to the point that he's willing to strap bombs to his body and make his women and children human shields. That defies the logic of the wonder of life. That's what hate will do. That's what this will do if it's not cleansed. So it's always compounded. Now, in the interpersonal connection between two people, it will always get worse. That's why the conflict in a marital situation will always begin to compound till the divorce. The wedge just gets wider and wider, the polarity farther and farther apart. So I want to make the distinction here, hurt, hate, harm. The red road, when I'm offended, first I hurt, then I hate, then I harm. That the Bible is very clear on the difference between anger and wrath, and we need to get this right because it's very important. It's not about semantics. The Greek word for anger is thumos. I love this definition, thumos. It is, the word for anger is orge. Orge. And it means that it arises gradually and then becomes more settled. You know the command in Ephesians 4:26? Be angry. Why? If you're violated, that is a natural response. You say, wait, I've seen people lose control in their anger. Read the rest of the verse. As soon as you put lose control to anger, it's not anger anymore. It's wrath. That's why you do not complete the verse without seeing the distinction between anger and wrath. Be angry. Be ye angry and sin not. You are allowed to be angry. You're commanded to be if you've been violated or you're not real. Now that anger doesn't mean you go out shouting. If that works for you, fine. You don't have to not do that. But don't feel like you have to do it a certain way. Just be real about it. I'm angry. God gets angry in the true definition of the appropriate anger, and it's the orge anger, and it arises gradually, becoming more settled. Now, wrath, the word is thumos, and this is the blaze of temper which flares into violent words and deeds. I love that. The blaze. What is a blaze? What do we say when a building's burning? A blaze of fire. There's the fire again. The soul is on fire. If the soul's on fire, there's going to be a spontaneous combustion. Boom. And I like this. Some people say, well, he's got a temper. He's a fine man in the church, but he's got a temper. He's got wounding he hasn't dealt with. Let's call it what it is. Fruit. Lose control. Violent outburst. Fruit means root. See? No, they were talking about me. Wrath of man. Okay, the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. So wrath, thumos. Be angry, sin not, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. I've heard this misquoted. How many of you heard, I We don't let the sun go down in our anger. That's not what it says. If it's true anger, by definition, orge, you can be angry today, tomorrow, the next day. If it maintains itself in a settled condition where you're in control of it. But wrath, see, controls you. See, I do the anger, the wrath does me. I control the anger, the wrath controls me. We're, I think, the only program in the secular realm that does what's called rage dissolution rather than anger management, because the whole context of anger management is designed to keep people from losing control in their anger. And based on what we've all just now learned here is, anger by definition is controllable. It's wrath that the people are having, and if you don't recognize it for what it is, you won't know the proper source, therefore you can't address it with rage dissolution. That's why people in the prisons that we deal with say, yeah, I've been through all those anger management classes. It doesn't work for me. And I like to say this, it's not about you. The methodology is what's flawed, not you. The truth is you've got a betrayal against you that you have hate for, and that's on you, fella. And we're going to walk you through it. Okay. To bring this part to a close, you will see very quickly the admission and grieving is the first step to the healing. Now look, admission is right there at 3 o'clock. It's where the person left. When they went off the road to destruction, they get on where they left. In other words, after being offended, regardless of whether it was intentional or by default, not intentional, by accident, they must admit and begin a grieving process. Not going to go into detail because it's coming later. That admission and grieving leads to an appropriate confrontation and disclosure. And you say, whoa, I'm not sure I ever want to confront the people that offended me. It's not confronting them. It's first confronting yourself. And it may be confronting them in absentia. That's Latin for in their absence. Because your confrontation is not for them. It's for you. Because you're getting real about the truth about what happened to you. And it's when it happened that we went into silence and submission, and then the devil put a gag order on us so we didn't tell anybody, and then he feeds on that. Because the thing I want you to see in verse 27 of Ephesians 4 is, be angry, sin not, let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. That's written to the believer. That we actually give a place for the devil to torment us. We give him a door. When we let sun go down, or in other words, day after day, compounded violation against us, where our anger is no longer anger, it's wrath. And we now need to go on this journey. Admission and grieving, confrontation and disclosure, and then of course the cross, forgiveness and reconciliation. And without the cross, there is no forgiveness and reconciliation. And then restoration and healing. Consider this, that when there's wounding against you and I that has gone into infection, we cannot but have collateral damage around us. Collateral damage in military talk is when the bomb drops on the enemy, the splash zone takes out some civilians. They were not the intended target, but they lost their lives or they got wounded. My family was collateral damage of my wounding that was not healed for many years. They weren't the intended target. It's got to go somewhere. He is our great high priest who restores our souls. He can be touched with the feeling of our infirmity. Psalm 23, so often a dead psalm. No, it's a living psalm too. He restoreth my soul. You won't need it restored in the next. You need it restored now. Christ is our Savior and our restorer. And if our relationships are to be restored, our souls must be restored.